All right, good morning, everybody. I know some of you are heading toward camp. June and I will be heading toward camp here in about 45 minutes ourselves. But thanks for those who have stayed. I know some are probably not heading up there, even though if you haven't been to Whispering Pines lately, I would urge you to go and check it out. Beautiful camp that's been a part of our church history now for almost 50 years. Not quite, but going on 50 years now. So, Lee, good to have you back. Missed you last week.
We had a nice time. Went down to Savannah, Georgia, and spent 4 or 5 days down there.
Yeah, we're catching feedback here somehow. Let me see. Did that help? No?
Maybe.
All right, there you go.
Yeah, but it's a fascinating place. Of course, I love history anyway, but Savannah is probably one of the most historical places there is in the United States.
Yeah.
And then the way it's laid out, it's got all these little, I don't know if they called them squares but we stayed in the historic district, and there were so many places you could walk to and just learn about and enjoy. And I've never seen so many different places to eat in my life in such a condensed spot. I mean,
Well, you've convinced me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that convinced me. I don't care about the history part, but when you said eat.
Lots of great places to eat. Some awesome, you go down there, when you decide to go, if you get some ice cream, get it from Leopold's.
Leopold's ice
cream.
All right.
Man, that's good stuff.
Okay. We're in Genesis chapter 4 this morning as we're doing this kind of fresh approach to Genesis. As I shared with Brother Rodney a while back, I said, Brother Rodney, Genesis 1 through 11 is the most challenging part of the Bible to me. Far more difficult than the book of Revelation, far more difficult than most of the other books of the Bible. And it's not that I don't understand what is written in the text. I understand the words in the text. It's that I struggle to understand what the inspired writer is wanting us to know. Again, surface level, I get it. I do. I understand the surface level. The problem is trying to figure out what did the original writer, inspired writer, want us to know in that text. And Lee, I don't know where you are on this. I believe that Moses is the author of the Torah. I believe that. I believe Moses is the one who gave the law, authored the law. And the Torah is contained in the first 5 books of the Old Testament. That's what the Jews call the Torah. However, most modern scholars, and I think most modern scholars are probably correct on this, is that it appears that the first 5 books were compiled sometime later, taking what Moses had written but completing the process. All of it inspired. For instance, at the end of Deuteronomy, you have the death of Moses. I don't think Moses wrote about his own death.
That would be kind of...
that would be a strange one, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Now, could the Holy Spirit tell him, here's how you're going to die? I guess he could have. I just don't think that's what's going on in the text. There are phrases in there that talks about no king had ruled in Israel yet, which appears to be from a time when kings were ruling in Israel. And so to believe, we know the Psalms, for instance. The Psalms weren't written all by David. Part of them were written by David. But the Psalms were compiled over a long period of time. There's actually 5 books of the Psalms. I think a lot of us don't realize that, which meant that they developed as 5 different song books over a period of time. And I love to use the illustration, Lee. What was the first song book you remember in the church when you were growing up here in Nashville?
Let's see. It was a brown cover.
Christian Hymns number 2?
Actually, it was number 1.
Oh, you predate me.
Yeah. Well, the book does anyway. But
yeah.
We had number 1, and I think was the blue one number 2.
I think 3.
3 was blue, and 2 was...
I think you could get it in multiple colors. We had a brown one.
Was,
and then we went to Sacred Selections. Yep. I don't know if you did. Y'all remember, we always called that scared selections instead of, kind of a running joke. By the way, Sacred Selections was put out by the non-institutional brethren. And they put it out in an attempt to make it more biblically accurate. And so that's when they switched the song. Anybody remember how they changed When We All Get to Heaven? They changed the words to what, Mike? When the saved get to heaven. In other words, we're all not going to get to heaven. And of course, I looked at that going, okay, I understand your point, but boy, if you're going to go in there and collect change every all word, boy, you got a lot of changes to make in the hymn books. And then I forget what song book was after that. We, in our lifetime, has gone through multiple song books. Israel did the same thing. That's all I'm saying. And then finally was compiled in what we have as the 150 Psalms.
And Psalm 119 could be a book on its own.
Psalm 119 all by itself. Again, longest song in the Bible. I would love to hear it sung. I'm sure the way they sang it was very different than the way we sing. They did not sing 4-part harmony. I know we think they did, but they didn't. And Hebrew is a very rhythmic language. The emphasis is always on the last syllable. And so as you go through Hebrew, you get this cadence that you're able to develop that English just doesn't have in it. All right, so let's look at Genesis. I want to emphasize this, that with the fall of Adam and Eve, man's rebellion sends creation back into chaos or disorder. Now, you're going to see it build slowly with Cain, with Lamech, and then, of course, eventually with the sons of God and the daughters of men intermarrying, and then God goes, okay, I'm throwing everything back into chaos, and he sends the flood, and everything returns to basically Genesis 1, verse 2. But you see that. You're going to see that especially today. You're going to see Cain questioning, why should I behave like this? And the understanding in the text is because you're made in the image of God, but you're moving away from it. And so you see them leaving the image of God there. And so that's kind of the world that we see taking place. The end of 3, God banishes man from the garden. There's the beginning of us losing our privilege. We have to now go out and work the ground. He drives man out, and to make sure, and I emphasized this last week, Leah, and I'd love to get your opinion on this. I said, he puts the cherubim, these angelic type beings, whatever they are, he puts them to guard the way, and he puts a flaming sword. And my question to everybody last week was, how would Adam and Eve even know what a sword was?
Yeah, that's... I guess he just told them,
Yeah, that will hurt you if you get near it.
If you touch that, it's kind of like the stove.
Kind of like the stove. You touch that, you'll get burnt. I mean, again, you need to realize if you've never seen a sword, why would an appearance of a sword, wouldn't you just kind of look at a sword and go, what is that? One of my professors, Lee, years ago, was translating the Bible into Peruvian Indian tribes down in Peru, way up in the Andes. Now, you think translating the Bible into an Indian language in the Andes would be like translating it everywhere else. But the problem was when he came to the word sea and the word boat. How many seas are there in the Andes Mountains? Anybody want to guess? It's an easy guess.
0.
None. There are no seas in the Andes. Okay? I mean, these are way up in the highest mountains in South America. You got glaciers, they melt, the water runs down. You live on hillsides, you farm in terraces. There are no seas. And if you don't have seas, guess what else you don't have? You don't have a boat. And so Jesus gets in a boat and he says to the Indian who's helping him translate, what's your word for boat? And the guy looks at him and says, what's a boat? And you're like, well, that's what you get into when you're on a lake or a sea. He said, what's a lake and a sea? Y'all see the problem, right? By the way, I work with guys in prison. One of the things that's interesting when you work with guys in prison, especially guys who have been in prison 20, 25, 30 years, when they come out, the world they come out into is not the world they left when they went into prison. You take them to the bank and you say, here's an ATM. And guess what they ask? What's an ATM? Well, that's the way you get money. Well, how do you get money out of it? Well, you use your debit card. What's a debit card? By the way, you want to see some fun? Hand a guy who's never held a cell phone in his hand, hand him a cell phone and try to teach him how to use it. I mean, they're looking at you going, okay, I need to do what? Well, you need to slide that bar. What bar? Well, it's not a bar. Run your finger across the... Why'd you call it a bar? Well, they called it a bar. Okay, once I do it, well, now you got to punch in your password. A what? Password. Y'all do know that 30 years ago, none of us had passwords, right? In the 60s, what was password in the 60s? It was a show on TV. You're exactly right, Paul. I mean, we didn't have passwords. And now, guess what? I've got a card for Speedway down here, the gas station. I've built up 25,000 points on my Speedway card. Anybody want to guess my problem?
Don't know how to access
I can't remember my password. I tried to punch it in. It said wrong password. I tried to punch it, wrong password. The clerk said, you put in one more wrong password, you got to contact the office you got to call them online. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So how Adam and Eve knew this was a sword, I don't know. I mean, they had never seen a sword. They had never seen a battle. They didn't know what it was to kill someone. So again, questions.
Yeah. Somehow or another, I think, obviously, of course, by this point with sin, they already knew guilt. They already knew fear. I mean, they were afraid of God now. And I dare say, if they saw if they saw him and they saw the sword, I mean, they would have known that was formidable. I mean, I think something, whether God told them directly or whether just a realization that this is not something to mess with.
And every other instance of human beings coming into the presence of angels is always accompanied by the words, "Be not afraid," because something about their very appearance strikes fear in us. And so we get to chapter 1, and we have
chapter 4.
Chapter, thank you. Verse 1, chapter 4. You have the birth of the first child. And so Adam made love to his wife. The Hebrew word is new. That's why the King James, or English word, translates new. Knew his wife. She became pregnant, gave birth to Cain. Cain means to have gotten, to receive. With the help of the Lord, I brought forth a man. With the help of the Lord, I brought forth a man. Now, we're not told a lot about the birth of Cain because the story is going a very unique direction. So we know nothing about how long was it between Cain and the birth of Abel. We don't know. What was it like for Adam and Eve to have a child for the first time? I can't help but think it's probably like us. What was your first thoughts after the birth of your first child? What was the first thoughts went through your mind?
It's like, how did this happen? Almost. I mean, but not when I say that is just the amazement of it, of the whole process. Now, we had C-section, but when that baby's put in your hands for the first time, and you're just like, this is amazing, but it's also the scariest thing I've ever done.
First thought I had was, what in the world have June and I just started? Have we lost our minds? And I was pretty sure very quickly that we had. And so I don't know if Adam and Eve thought that. But what I do love, though, is the fact that the text recognizes that it's with the help of God. God is the giver of life. We may work through the process with him, but it is God who gives the soul, the spirit, whatever we want to call it. And so you have the birth, and then later she gives birth to his brother Abel, and then you just skip everything. All right? 2 sons born. You don't hear anything else, but you do hear what they do. Abel kept flocks. Cain worked the soil. It's fascinating when I think about that. Of course, that kind of illustrates if you live in an agrarian culture, that's what you do. You have crops and you have flocks. But why one would go one direction and the other, again, the text doesn't answer those questions.
And of course, at that point, there is no industrial, there are no towns, there's no cities. I mean, it's
just them.
It's just them. So I guess you have to pick one. There weren't a whole lot of choices, I guess, as far as what they were going to do. And again, why one chose one and one chose the other. There was nothing wrong with either one. I think sometimes, when we see here a little bit, sometimes we maybe read into, well, Cain must have been doing something wrong with the way he was gardening. Well, I don't think that was the case. That wasn't his problem. But, these were pretty much the choices. There wasn't a whole lot of other options out there.
Yeah. My grandparents were farmers. I grew up as kind of the last generation of what I call old-fashioned farms. And so my grandmother and granddad were farmers, and to go out grandmothers meant that you were going to do one of two things. You were going to work in the garden or in the field, or you were going to go down and pick up the eggs, or go down and help with the pigs and slop the pigs, or you're going to go down and feed the cows. Mm-hmm. I mean,
and that was fun. When you're only going for a week or something,
I still remember, though, going to get the cows up and coming back barefooted. Anybody know what happens when you come back from getting the cows and you're barefooted? Kids today can't appreciate that. Mm-mm. Cow piles are incredibly warm. They squish up through your toes. And if you've never experienced that, don't, okay? I experienced that. I still remember going with my grandfather and watching him milk the cow. Now, Lee, I tried to learn how to milk cows. And Dad sent me with a bucket. We had bought a cow and a calf. Dad sent me with a bucket to milk the cow. 30 minutes later, I come back to the house, and I've got enough milk to fill this cup. And Dad said, "Son, that's awful." He takes the bucket, goes back. 15 minutes later, he's got a whole gallon. I couldn't figure it out. I'm like, I don't know how this is supposed to work. I mean, I understand the basics, but my hands couldn't do it. So, Abel learning that, Cain learning that, to sustain yourself is the only thing you could do. But the inspired writer uses this to lead us to the next section. So, walk us through this.
Yeah, so in the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. Clearly, they have a relationship with God, something that was no doubt taught by Adam and by their parents. They know to come and worship, and they know the process of sacrifice, of giving back to God. The problem becomes, what's going wrong here with Cain?
What happens in this story?
Yeah.
If you go forward, and we all know this, the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. Now, I grew up being taught one way on this. And the way I was taught, and I don't know if you were taught this way, was that Cain didn't offer a blood sacrifice, that it had to be a blood sacrifice. And that's what I was taught. I've long since changed my mind on that, simply because God accepted both types of offerings under the Levitical law. In fact, you were required to bring both from the fruits of the field, whether it was the wine, whether it was the olive oil, whether it was the crops. You brought that as well as from your herds.
And there's nothing here in the text that's saying that his preference that there was anything wrong with offering fruits or vegetables. There's nothing there. It's deeper than that.
And I think the key to it is that language in verse 4. Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn. Because if there's one thing you get in the Old Testament, it is that God wants the top. He wants the first portion of it. And so if you go back into the Levitical law, the first lamb that is born belongs to God. First goat belongs to God. First calf belongs to God. By the way, what about children? What about the firstborn? Belongs to God. You have to redeem the firstborn. And by the way, under the Old Testament law, God said, I tell you what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take one of the tribes and replace all of your firstborn with a whole tribe. And of course, he takes the tribe of Levi. And by the way, we always talk about how many tribes of Israel? 12. How many tribes were there actually? 13. Because Levi was a tribe, but Levi did not get the land except cities scattered throughout. And so Joseph, his tribe got split in two. And so we always talk about the 12 tribes of Israel, but the reality is we had 13. And Rodney, why the reference to 12 when there's actually 13? Is it because of the land allocation? Number 12 is a holy number. Okay. By the way, many of you don't know this. Brother Rodney, before he was a Hebrew professor, was a math teacher. Brilliant mathematician. A lot of people don't know that, but he gave up a very promising career in mathematics in order to go into the field he did. And he tells me that when he retires, he's going to go back to teaching math. No, I'm joking. First of all, everybody knows, Sister Juanita especially, Rodney's never retiring, is he? No. Dennis.
Just a question concerning Hebrews 9, verse 22. And according to the law, almost all things are purged with blood. Without shedding blood, there's no remission. Was that strictly with the law of Moses, or did this precede Moses go back to the time of Adam? Do we know that?
Rodney, yeah. We're not told. It's kind of like the Sabbath law. You have the Sabbath established in Genesis 1, but the Sabbath appears not to have been followed until the giving of the law of Moses. I mean, as Moses is leading the Israelites out, he says, now here's the reason for the Sabbath, but Abraham, to my knowledge, never observed the Sabbath. If he did, we're never told that. Now, Abraham made sacrifices, but then again, is it the blood or not? Again, that's what I think is going on. Can I prove that as to why? No. God doesn't say, here's why I rejected yours. And I've heard all kinds of explanations. Blood sacrifice, should have been both sacrifices. Abel offered in addition. I've heard Brother V.P. Black many years ago argue that Cain offered only from the fruit of the field, but Abel offered both the fruit of the field and from the livestock, from the fat portions of the lamb. I disagreed with Brother Black on that. He was kind of the great guru on giving back then. But a lot of different views on that. Rodney?
One view you haven't mentioned is Cain's attitude, the attitudes of the two. A lot of people offer things to God that they don't really want to or do it grudgingly.
Yeah.
So we don't know that. And we also don't know really how much information they were given. It may have been laid out very clearly.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like the word sword, it really doesn't matter. They knew what it was, but the reader needs to know what it was.
Right.
And could you see a flaming sword? It's still a flame. It's a big flame of something. It may be divided.
Yeah.
There's a lot of little things that, like Cain, for example. The word Cain in Hebrew is Q-A-I-N. That goes into Greek and in English as C-A-I-N. It's from the word gain comes from Cain. So she said, I called him Cain because I gained him from the Lord. And
Yeah.
Hebrew, both are the same roots. Does that make any sense?
It does. Rodney said, first of all, that it may have been attitude, that we don't know the attitude of Cain and Abel. Did Cain come grudgingly, Abel willingly? We know that's important from Paul's writing to the Corinthians. And then he said, in regards to the sword, whether they knew it was a sword or not, they knew it was something not to mess with, which is what you said, Lee. And then he went back to the name Cain, and Cain comes from a Hebrew word that means gain. And so I have gained, which by the time you go into Greek and then into English becomes C-A-I-N. And so Cain. And so, yeah, Mike.
So David says that the sacrifice of a broken and contrite heart is what God is looking for. That's what he's pleased with.
Yeah,
So we could surmise from that it was Cain's attitude and not what he brought.
yeah. Yeah, you see how we all come at it from so many different directions, and at the end of the day, the answer to the question, why was it rejected, we don't know. We know it was, and we know all of these are valid reasons. You know, which one he was guilty of,
Yeah,
I don't
as
know.
as it leads into what becomes important is not why it was rejected. It was what was his response.
What was his response?
And that's that's something we have. That's something that I look at myself. If I'm, most of us don't enjoy being reprimanded.
I do.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, that's why I married June.
okay.
Joking.
By the way,
Boy, I've got to ride with her to camp here in a few minutes.
Yeah.
I'm in trouble.
by the way, Joan brought me my coffee again this morning.
Oh, did she?
She did.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Good.
just wanted you to know.
I went back and there was no lines. Yeah, today was good.
But yeah, it's going to come down to how do we respond to circumstances? How do we respond to being reprimanded or being told,
Yeah.
what to do, or how we need to change our responses, perhaps? And I think that's where we're leading to here with this.
Yeah, notice the text. So Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. Now, how did Cain know his was, did God give him a score sheet? Did he hold up, Abel, number 10, Cain, 1. We don't know how God communicated his disapproval there, but Cain knew it. And so he's very angry. A lot of different meanings in that language there, Lee.
Yeah, downcast, you get, whether it's sad, discouraged, dejected, self-pity, there's almost always going to be a bad result when I start feeling sorry for myself. That almost never, I can't ever think of a time where that led to something good when I started feeling sorry for myself.
I can give you one example.
All right.
Not sorry for yourself. My youngest grandson's 3 years old. His name's Garrett. And when Garrett gets reprimanded, he looks more downcast than any human being I've ever seen. One of my favorite pictures, and mine and June's both, is him sitting in the corner in time out, and he looks like he's lost the entire world. He's got his lips dropped down, and he's looking. It is absolutely the funniest photo, but he has always been that way. He can be laughing and happy, Curtis, one moment, and then something bad goes, and he's got his lip pooched out. You talking about downcast. That grandson of June's, yeah, see, by the way, that's the way my brother always says, by the way, do you know what your sister's done recently? And I go, when did she become my sister and not your sister? So, you know how families are. We always get that way. And so the Lord comes to Cain. Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? God's telling him, listen, you know if you had done what was okay. So it appears God knows that Cain knows what he did that was wrong.
Yeah. And he basically is presenting this as, look, this isn't something to stay down about. This, for lack of a better way of putting it, this is an easy fix.
Learn from it.
Just learn from it.
Yeah, do what is right.
And of course we say, well, that should be an easy fix. Well, how many times do I have to take to learn something the right way at times? And so the fix is there. He can do it. It wouldn't be hard if his attitude is going to be a good attitude. But if he keeps focusing on himself rather than focusing on God and on pleasing God, then that's that's where he gets into more trouble.
Yeah, watch that word very angry in our last verse, because you're going to see this take place. Notice the next thing he says, God says, but if you do what is right, but if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. Okay, it's this image of Satan, the devil, like this roaring lion. It desires to have you. This goes back to the language that God used in reference to Eve. Your desire is for your husband, but he will rule over you. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. In other words, don't let sin take control of your life. It wants to, and it's right there on the edge. You have got to fight this. And of course, God's putting it, lead to Cain. It's your choice.
Yeah.
It's your free choice.
Just like it's all of our choices.
And how many times do we do the wrong one? Yeah.
Yeah. I've counted, I think it was 3 times in my life is all I've done.
3 times?
Just 3. So I'm not in pretty good shape. So.
Joan went. Okay, all right.
70 times 7.
70 times 7. You're exactly right. And then notice the text. How angry is he? Notice how angry he is. Then Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel. Killed him. Now, no human being had died up to this point in time. Animals had died. I assume, now, man's not eating animals yet, and so I assume Cain and Abel had not killed animals to eat, because that comes after the flood narrative, at least in the text. But you see death for the first time entering. And of course, so many questions come up. But the point that I want you to see is how angry Cain is, that he kills his own brother. Any brothers?
No. Have a sister. But
Have
no
a
brother.
sister.
Yeah.
Y'all ever get angry with one another?
Mine is always righteous indignation.
Oh, you're okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't anger; it was righteous.
It was just
indignation.
righteous indignation. Yeah. I mean, kids used to fight like cats and dogs because you knew exactly what bugged the other one the most.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what you do. I don't know if you ever did that with your.
Oh yeah, I had an
sibling,
older
yeah.
brother, younger brother, and fighting was part of what you did. I remember I went off to college and I bought some boxing gloves. Came back home with the boxing gloves during Christmas break. My brother at that time was about in the 9th grade, and he looked at me and said, I want to fight. And I said, no, you don't either. He said, I do too. I want to fight. And the next morning after anyway, it didn't go well for my brother. Let me just put it that way. and the next morning, I couldn't find my boxing gloves. And I went to my mom and I said, Mom, where's my boxing gloves? And she said, where you'll never find them. And I never found those. 16-ounce boxing gloves, Rodney. And my mother, I don't know where she threw them, but they were gone. Never did discover them. Why? Fighting with my brother. Well, this is more than fighting.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know, again, for me, I guess I'm kind of reading into the text a little bit, and this may or may not be the case, but I've always kind of thought, let's go out to the field. Okay, I need to get him away from mom and dad. I need to get him away from everybody else so that I've got him to myself.
And it's almost he's thinking, I got to get away from God.
Yeah.
As if he could.
Right.
And, yeah.
So it seems as though, in my mind, again, I don't know, it could be that once he got out in the field, something, he said or did something that just set him off. But it almost seems like it's a premeditated
yes.
response or action that he's putting all this together.
And by the way, this is the reason why when you get to the New Testament, John will say whoever hates his brother, who's angry with his brother, is a murderer. This is where anger takes us. Again, working at River Bend Prison, one of the things you very quickly realize in working in the prison system is that there are people there who are habitual criminals. I mean, they're criminals, they've been criminals all their life. Those usually don't come up and let us help them. Those people are that's the world they live in. They live according to the flesh. But the other half of people in prison are there because of this very action right here. There's a moment in their life where they lose it. And they get so angry that their anger causes them to do something that, if they're in their right mind, they don't do. And so I don't know how many guys I have worked with who, they're not habitual criminals. You look at their life's a good life until that one day when they got into it with their spouse. That one day when they got into it with their brother. I mean, I've got a friend. He's a friend of mine, but he's in prison because he, like Cain, killed his brother. And so these things happen, and you see it here, and it's the result of someone becoming so angry that the anger consumes them.
It's like seeing red.
Yes.
You know, you don't, I don't know how many different times, I mean, I've heard in with regards to people who've committed such crimes, they don't even remember committing them.
They don't.
They don't. That doesn't mean they're not responsible.
Right.
Don't get me wrong, but they don't remember it because the anger had basically blinded them to everything else.
Yeah. And by the way, you throw in some drugs or you throw in some alcohol, you know, the most dangerous thing a police officer does is a domestic dispute where they're fighting, and especially if there's alcohol or drugs involved. That's when the police officers are like, great. You know, this is what I'm facing. And let me tell you, I have been in some situations where I have told June of where I've gone out in the middle of the night as a minister, and I've said, if you've not heard from me by this time, call the police. Because you just don't know what you're walking into. I mean, you walk into a fight between a husband and wife. I got called one night by a mother who said, listen, my husband and my son are in an all-out fist fight, and I need help. And, of course, I said, why did you call me? No, I'm joking. I did not. I told June, I said, if I haven't called you in a certain amount of time, you call the police. And I walked into a situation where, sure enough, here's the son in one corner of the living room, here's the dad in the other corner of the living room, and they are so mad that mom thought, you know, the wife and the mom thought that they might kill each other. And so that's what anger does to you. It's quite astonishing. And so we have the first case of fratricide, of literally brother killing brother, and which is the meaning of the word. And I love this, Lee.
Yeah.
Why would God ask Cain this question?
Yeah, just, and as you say, you already got up there, you know, goes back to Genesis 3. Well, where are you? Well, God knew where Adam was. You know, he knew where Abel was. But he also, you know, maybe he was trying to give Cain a chance to at least, you know, take responsibility. Yeah. And of course, we see that is the furthest thing from Cain's mind as far as taking responsibility.
And I apologize. That says Genesis 3:1. It's Genesis 3:9. You see it up on the text. Apologize for that mistake there. I actually saw that in fixing the lesson, and said, I need to come back and fix that, and didn't. So I was looking for it in my sermon. I thought, man, in the sermon, I've got a mistake in there somewhere, and it wasn't. It was in the Bible lesson. And like you said, he didn't own it. I don't know. He did know. He did know where his brother was. Now, did he bury his brother? I don't know. We don't know any. Again, details are not supplied, and that's not the point of the text. We get asked a multitude of questions. That's not the point. How did he know he was dead? Did he take his pulse? You know, did he go over and kick him? I mean, you can ask all the questions. We don't have answers. You've never seen death. How would you know what death was? But look at the question we do know. Am I my brother's keeper? That's innate. That's built in. He knows the answer to that question. Of course, I'm my brother's keeper. Which, by the way, is one of the great difficulties in the world today. We are one another's keeper. And yet, how many times do we see crimes committed? I don't know. I saw one this week, Lee, that I thought was so good, and I'm trying to remember the restaurant. Some of y'all may have saw it, but there was a clerk at the restaurant, and a guy came in to rob the restaurant, reached over to grab the money, and the clerk grabbed him. Then another worker grabbed him, and then a third worker. That guy didn't rob them. They got him. And I thought, that's the way, of course, if they'd all got shot, we'd say, whatever you do, don't do that. But boy, they acted and said, no, you're not going to rob us. You know, I'm my brother's keeper. I'm going to step in and do something. And so am I my brother's keeper?
Yeah, so Cain attempts to avoid responsibility for his brother, even though he's the one who murdered him. How often do we attempt to avoid responsibility by claiming something, isn't our problem, isn't our responsibility? I don't know how many times I've done that, but it's been way too many. When I'm constantly trying to push it off on somebody else. Well, that wasn't my fault. That happened because so-and-so did this or didn't do that, or, well, it's because these circumstances came about. I have to own what I do. And the things that I do, the things that I say, I've got to own them. I think I think God was trying to give Cain the opportunity to own what he did. And in some ways, maybe that would have been the first step back to rebuilding a relationship with God. Is when we own up and when we ask God for forgiveness. That's part of rebuilding a relationship with Him.
Yeah. One of the things that I do on a periodic basis is I speak at parole hearings. I go out to River Bend, somebody's coming up for parole, and I will speak in their behalf. They ask me to do so, and I go out there and do that. But one of the things we tell inmates, and we do this on a regular basis, is we say when you go to the parole hearing, the parole board is going to want to hear 3 things from you. And that's it. 3 things. Number 1, I did the crime. Number 2, here's what the crime was. And number 3, I'm sorry. And if you try to get around any of those 3, guess what's not going to happen? You're not going to make parole. And oftentimes, and I have been there, where inmates have said, well, I am accused of. Once you begin your sentence with those words, you can hang it up. You will not get the votes. You cannot say, I was accused of. You better go ahead and say. Now, a lot of the inmates will say this. They will say, yes, but I wasn't guilty of everything they accused me of. And sometimes that's true. Legal system is messy. And sometimes you are accused of things you didn't do. But when you have been convicted by a jury of your peers, all the parole board wants to know is, will you admit it? Will you take responsibility for it? And are you sorry for it? It is that simple. That's what I think God was wanting to hear here. Mm-hmm. And that's not what He heard. What have you done? Listen, your blood cries out to me from the ground. Going back to Hebrews chapter 11, the righteous blood of Abel. Mm-hmm. I mean, Abel is considered one of these righteous men, and the blood cries out. And y'all, I can't help but think, as I've watched the news, I can't imagine going into a community and digging up all that have been buried, that were killed during the occupation, during this war over there in Ukraine. I've just watched them as they, one mass grave the other day, over 400 bodies, men, women, and children. I can't imagine that. Just how much blood cries up from the ground to God in our world today. And by the way, you don't have to go to Ukraine to do that. That happens in Nashville. June, just the day before yesterday, I guess, she said, you did hear about the shooting that occurred less than a mile from our house, didn't you? And as we were praying that day, June said, Lord, let us not live in fear, but let us be careful, because it can happen anywhere, anywhere. And we see that. And so the Lord, what have you done? And so God goes ahead to pronounce judgment.
Yeah. You're under a curse, driven from the ground, which is in the verse. When you work the ground, it's not going to yield its crops for you. It's like,
yes.
Well, now what do I do? If I'm going to do this, how am I going to survive? You'll be a restless, a wanderer, a vagabond almost, like, on the earth. God's laid it out there for him. Would that have been his punishment if he had owned up to it? I don't know. I mean, maybe, maybe not. But he is basically being ostracized from his family, and wherever it is that, a restless wanderer on the earth. I kind of wonder exactly how much.
Yeah. What does that mean?
What does that mean at that point,
Yeah,
as
at
far
that
as
point
how
in time.
far he's having to wander? But he's got his punishment's being laid out for him.
Yeah, worker of the field that is now cursed, which
Yeah.
appears to be the language all the way through. All right, our time is up. But notice, Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you're driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence." That, of course, is not true, but that's what he thinks. "I'll be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." Now, June and I have got to go to Whispering Pines, but Lee's going to stay and explain who the who are. No, wouldn't do that to you, brother. We'll pick up with this one next week, which is what the point he was making a while ago. When you're driven from your family, who are you fearing? Okay? That, again, is one of those questions that pops up in the text that you go, And so we will try to address that one next week. Again, if you can, head to Whispering Pines, hamburgers, hot dogs. All the fixings are up there. Please take advantage of that. It'll be a beautiful day. If you just love the drive, the beautiful drive up there, and I know you would enjoy it. So, Lee, if you don't mind, how about dismiss us in prayer?
God, we again thank you for your blessings. We thank you for your being our God, our Creator, our Father, and through your Son, our Redeemer. Help us to learn from the lessons that are for us within Scripture, and realizing that while sometimes we may be tempted to point fingers at those within Scripture and wondering how they could do the things they did, oftentimes we can look back in our own lives, in our own history, and see that we've taken very similar steps at times. But we thank you for your forgiveness. We thank you for your love. Help us to reflect that love to those that we have the opportunities to meet, whether it's people that we work with, our neighbors, the time that we're able to spend with family, to be able to let them see that you are indeed in control of our lives. It doesn't mean we're perfect, but we're trying to allow you to be the one who is in charge, and who makes such a wonderful difference, an indescribable difference in our lives and in the lives of all those who will accept you. We ask you to be with us throughout the rest of this day. We pray for your guidance in the things that we say and do. And again, we just thank you that we can be your children. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.
God bless you. Have a great day.